In 2016, several news organizations published stories describing provocative but unexplained computer pings, computer connections between servers associated with the Trump Organization and servers associated with a Kremlin-connected Russian bank. The researchers had effectively metadata showing that there was communication, but they didn't have anything about what the content of the communication was. So nobody could say what this meant, and there was a lot of other stuff going on, and pretty quickly slid out of the news. Until now, because it's a boomerang. Because it is apparently an ongoing, concerted Republican and pro-Trump project to try to turn the investigation of the Russia scandal into some kind of scandal itself. As I said, Trump and William Barr left behind at the Justice Department this special counsel, his name is John Durham, to investigate the people who had the temerity to investigate what Russia did in the 2016 election, as if the investigation of the Russia scandal was itself the scandal. And last month, that special counsel, who is still in place, even though the Biden administration is there now and the Justice Department has changed its leadership, John Durham is still there doing his work. And last month, he brought an indictment against a lawyer who brought the allegations about these computer contacts between the Trump Organization and the Russian bank. He brought allegations and data about those unexplained contacts between those servers. He brought it to the FBI. And it makes sense that he brought it to the FBI. He himself was a former national security lawyer at the Justice Department. He had worked on lots of high-end national security criminal cases in his time in government service. He knew this information was going to the press. He decided to bring it to the FBI so they wouldn't be blindsided by the press coverage. And also, frankly, because the matter did have obvious national security implications that the FBI should know about if the worst implications of that data were ultimately borne out. Last month, special counsel John Durham brought a criminal charge against that lawyer who brought the data to the FBI, saying the lawyer did not consistently explain whether he was acting on behalf of a client when he brought the FBI that data, or if he was acting on his own. He's a former national security lawyer from the Justice Department, like with a, security clearance and everything, who's worked on serious national security cases in the past. He goes back to his colleagues at the FBI and says, this is going to end up in the press and this has implications. You guys ought to look at it. Do they care on whose behalf or anyone's he brought it in? I don't know. But that's the charge John Durham made against this guy, and that will ultimately be for a jury to decide, not you or me. But here's the rub. In their tireless efforts to try to make the Russia investigation itself a scandal, in trying to bring this prosecution, this guy John Durham, Barr's special prosecutor, he wrote this whole long 27-page indictment against this lawyer. And the indictment spells out this kind of inexplicable charge against the lawyer about whether he consistently described who his client was, whatever. But that 27-page indictment, I mean, that doesn't take that long to say that, right? The reason this is 27 pages is because the indictment also spins out this tale, this allegation that the Trump Alfa-Bank communications, the data this guy brought to the FBI about those connections between those computer servers, Durham spells out this sort of conspiracy theory in the allegation that that whole story was a deliberately concocted false allegation that was made up out of whole cloth on purpose just to try to hurt Trump. And the people who came up with this allegation, they knew it was false, but they pushed it anyway. Now, John Durham didn't actually charge any of that alleged behavior, but he wrote it all into the indictment anyway, along with very thinly veiled references to all of the researchers and the tech people involved in doing the research in the first place, all of the people who discovered these communications between the Trump Organization and the Russian bank. None of these people were technically identified by name in the indictment, but they were all described by Durham with such specificity that it took about 5 minutes for people to figure out who these researchers were, and it took fewer minutes than that for all of their names and very specific personal information to be all over the internet, and it took even less time than that for all the threats to start, right? This has naturally made their lives a living hell, because now they've got a Kremlin-connected bank run by billionaire Putin-aligned Russian oligarchs coming after them for this. And they've got all the Trump trolls in the world coming after them as well, since Durham basically accused them in print of having made up this terrible thing to make Trump look bad, which they knew was false, but they pushed it anyway. Well, here comes that effort boomeranging right back at them, because it turns out you can drag these folks into it. You can ruin their lives. You can smear them with allegations you never intend to prove, that they were somehow bad faith actors here doing bad things to Donald Trump and the Russians. But these people can defend themselves too. They can at least speak for themselves. And it turns out what they know, what they found, what they are now willing to say out loud is that not only was it absolutely the right thing to do, to hand over that stuff to the FBI when they discovered it back in 2016, but also this is kind of a real story. The connections between the Trump servers and the Alfa-Bank servers were real. They were covert communications that someone was trying to hide, that the Trump Organization and Alfa-Bank appear to have been trying to hide. They say this was not made up. And these are the people who figured it out in the first place. And so they're the ones who have the receipts. So we started to see their pushback a couple of weeks ago. This is from the New York Times several weeks ago. Quote, lawyers for one of the researchers whom the indictment discussed said the Alfa-Bank results, quote, have been validated and are reproducible. The findings of the researchers were true then and remain true today. Reports that these findings were innocuous or a hoax are simply wrong. A lawyer for another of the data experts cited in the indictment said his client had a duty to share this information with the FBI. Well, now tonight, we have reviewed a letter. I have reviewed a letter written to John Durham, the special counsel. It's CC'd to Attorney General Merrick Garland, and that's a good thing. It's from the lawyer of one of the technical experts who is who is described in the indictment. He's not one of the people charged. He's described in the indictment. They don't describe him by name, but they describe him in such detail that he was instantly doxxed as soon as the indictment came out. This is one of the people who Durham says, basically says in his indictment, helped make up this whole thing about Trump and Alfa-Bank and shopped it to the FBI knowing it was made up. Look at this boomerang. Look at this boomerang. Look at what they've just sent to the Justice Department, again, to John Durham himself and to Merrick Garland. The computer scientists who reviewed this data starting in the late spring and early summer of 2016, quote, thoughtfully and thoroughly performed the research necessary to assess the nature of the alleged Trump-Alfa Spectrum Health connection. And they collaboratively shared their views about what the data showed or did not show. In the end, the researchers unanimously concluded that the data reflected the existence of a covert communication channel between the Trump Organization, Alfa-Bank, and Spectrum Health, and that this channel warranted further investigation. Again, the unanimous conclusion of all of the researchers. Remember that Durham said that the researchers concluded this stuff was false and pushed it anyway. No, they unanimously concluded these allegations were true. Moreover, quote, to this day, the researchers who performed the analysis, as well as other leading experts in the field, maintain that this conclusion is supported by the data, and no credible expert has refuted it. The researchers ultimately concluded that the data did in fact support the conclusion that there was a covert communications channel between Alpha, the Trump Organization, and Spectrum Health. This letter to Durham then quotes emails among the researchers at the time they were looking at this data. These are emails that Durham apparently had for his investigation that he ignored in writing up this indictment because he wanted the indictment to make it look like this was all a hoax and the researchers knew it. Well, the researchers also still have access to their emails from the time. They know it wasn't a hoax. They know they never believed it was a hoax, and they know they discussed it in those terms amongst themselves contemporaneously while they were reviewing the data. For example, quote, if the white paper intends to say that there are communications between at least Alpha and Trump, which are being intentionally hidden by Alpha and Trump, I absolutely believe that is the case. And from another researcher, quote, facts. It's clear there's hidden communications between Trump and Alfa-Bank. Quote, these contemporaneous communications evince the researchers' good faith belief that, number one, there was a covert communications channel between Alpha, the Trump Organization, and Spectrum Health. And number two, the existence of such a channel was predication for and relevant to an investigation of potential criminal law violations. And so, yes, therefore, they brought it to the FBI, as they should have. Again, this is from a letter sent to the Justice Department, sent to Special Counsel John Durham and to Attorney General Merrick Garland that we reviewed today. I personally reviewed it. This is a letter from a lawyer for one of these technical experts who was basically outed by the special counsel, John Durham. He's a computer researcher who is now being hounded and threatened constantly because Durham cast these public aspersions against him and his colleagues, that this part of the Russia investigation was somehow something that they made up. They concocted this hoax because they're bad actors who knew it was false, but they pushed it against Trump anyway. That doesn't appear to be at all what happened. But those people's lives are being destroyed by those allegations, by the threats and the targeting of them, by people who are essentially sicked on them by what Durham did. These are also folks, though, who can speak for themselves, and they are doing so now. And in so doing, Trump and Barr's special counsel, John Durham, and all the people trying to make this part of the Russia investigation some kind of liability for the people who figured it out, some kind of scandal that they discovered what they did, all of those folks are now catching this boomerang right in the teeth. Because boy, howdy, is this story revived now, right? When's the last time you had heard about this story at all? I hadn't thought about it in years. But it turns out we now know that the Trump Alfa-Bank story isn't disproven. It isn't a hoax. The people who found it out in the first place to this day think that what they found was conclusive evidence that a covert communication channel was open during the campaign between the Trump organization and a Russian bank connected to the Kremlin. It was a covert communication channel that existed during the campaign and that both sides deliberately covered up. Really? Tell me more. Hadn't thought about this in years, but now I want to know a lot more about it because now it seems like way more of a live question than before you tried to ruin these people's lives as a way of trying to make this story go away forever. Boomerang.